لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة وذلك دين القيمة صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us for His worship, and because He is our creator and it is for His worship that we have been placed here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires from us that all our good deeds be performed sincerely, and that the only intention or motive for doing those good deeds is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a Muslim engages in good deeds, trying to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trying to please Him, because he knows that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with him, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have mercy on him, Allah will also help him, Allah will give him blessings, Allah will grant him forgiveness, Allah will grant him the bounties of this world, Allah will grant him the bounties of the hereafter. Everything is tied to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Muslim also realizes that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displeased with me, then I have to deal with His anger in this world and His anger in the hereafter. So a Muslim is constantly running towards the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fleeing from the displeasure and the anger and the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we do this by making sure that we have two things. The first thing is that we have those deeds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered us to perform, and we are avoiding those deeds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden us from. This is the first thing. The second thing is that while we are performing those deeds and performing them correctly, while we are abstaining from bad deeds and abstaining from them in the way we have been told and commanded, all of this is taking place only for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the deed itself is correct, it is performed correctly, and the intention or the motive behind it is also correct, then that deed becomes accepted in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once it's accepted, then it brings the pleasure of Allah, and it brings all of those things that good deeds can give us. And if it's deprived, the deed itself is good, but it's performed in an incorrect way, or it's performed correctly, but the intention is off, it's not solely to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this deed not only gets rejected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it also becomes a source of anger. Hadith indicating the necessity of sincerity are plenty. Whether it's sincerity in belief, sincerity in worship, sincerity in helping others, sincerity in spending in the path of Allah, sincerity in striving in the path of Allah. A hadith cover all of these aspects of sincerity, and the common factor is a person must empty their heart and their mind of any motive other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Quran is filled with many lessons and encouragement, as well as warnings for those who don't observe ikhlas. But in today's discussion, let's take a look at how our pious predecessors pious people of the past, the pious Muslims of the past, how they observed sincerity. What was their sincerity like? So when we have models and examples in front of us, it gives us some indication of what path to walk on. Because when we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for hidayat, for guidance, we're asking Him for the path of guidance. And that path is indicated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the form of the people who have walked that path. Al-Nabiyyin, Al-Siddiqeen, Al-Shuhada, Al-Salihin. So when you have those markers, those people in front of you that mark the path becomes clear. If you don't have those people in front of you, you have all the knowledge about the path, but you don't have those markers, you're not really sure if you're walking on the right path or not. So, Ibrahim ibn Adham, rahimahullah, used to say that people in the past used to learn. And once they learned, they started practicing. When they started practicing, they would become occupied. Because they know what to do, and they're doing it, now they are completely occupied. They don't have time. When they became occupied, people would have trouble finding them. So people would go and search for them. The value has increased. We have knowledge, we have practice, and they are fully engaged in that practice. Now we need time from them. So they became sought after. People are chasing them around, following them around. And when people started following them around and looking for them, they would disappear. They would run away from it. Because they knew that if we engage with people, that it's going to take time away from our preoccupations of amal. And when we engage with people, people are going to start finding out about our good deeds, about our amal, and all of that is going to ruin us. So we'd rather just stay away. Talking about sincerity of intention, Fudayl ibn Iyad says that in our days, we would find people showing off about things, many people who are weak in their deen, showing off about things that they do. But he said today, we find people showing off about things that they don't even do. Even things that they haven't done, they want to give the impression that they have done those things. Somebody who is not pious wants to give the impression that they're very pious. Somebody who is not religious wants others to think that they're very religious. Somebody who hasn't done much for deen wants to give the impression that they have done a great deal for deen. And so on and so forth. Talking about the sincerity of the past and the insincerity of today. Rabi' ibn Khuzaym is a tabi'i. He is one of the students and disciples of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu said to him that you are such a person that if the Prophet ﷺ had seen you, he would have loved you. This is a very big endorsement coming from someone like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu said that every time I look at you, I remember the pious people of the past. I remember the great Sahaba. So, what was his ikhlas like? What was his sincerity like? His whole life, no one ever saw him praying nawafil. The reason being that he never prayed them in front of people. He would always pray his nawafil in private, in his house. You could observe him all your life, and you would never observe him praying a single nafil salat. Mansur ibn Mu'tamir, another great sheikh, used to pray Fajr. And after Fajr, he would act very much alert, awake, start talking to his friends, making conversation, and act like he has had a full night's sleep, acting very fresh. when in fact he had spent the whole night in ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, it's not coming out, rubbing his eyes, acting all tired, so that people can ask him, what's wrong, didn't you sleep? And then he would, very shyly say, no, I had to get up and, pray my tahajjud. No. Acting like he's been sleeping all night. And this in fact was the habit of many people. Many of the mashayikh of the past. Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahmatullahi alayhi had one disciple who traveled with him, spent many years traveling with him. So he says that once we were gone on an expedition, we were in battle. And Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahmatullahi alayhi wouldn't leave tahajjud whether he was traveling or whether he was at home or whether he was in battle. He would pray his tahajjud. So he saw that I was observing him, so he lay down. He lay down pretending to sleep. And he said, I lay down pretending that I had slept. When Ibn Mubarak felt that I had fallen asleep, he got up and started praying, and he prayed all night. And when Fajr time entered, I am there, I'm watching him all night. When Fajr time enters, he wakes me up as if I was asleep. And I said, I haven't slept either. I've been watching you the whole night. He said that he got so upset at this that he stopped talking properly to me. He was never as open with me or as friendly with me after that day. And I felt that he did not like the fact that someone knew about his own ibadat. He felt very much displeased that someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows about my ibadat. And he said he stayed like that, displeased with me until he left this world. We read about others that they would be reading the Quran. Somebody would walk in and they would cover their Quran with a cloth to show that they were just sitting around idly. Now this is not something that you have to do. But this is what those people used to do to protect their sincerity. That if this person walks in and sees me reciting the Quran, and they think that, this person is a great reciter of the Quran, and always engaged in ibadat, this is going to affect me. This is going to bring riyah into my heart. It's going to bring the realization that someone else is watching me. It's going to make me want to show off a little bit more. So because they didn't trust themselves, they did these kinds of things. And such things are mentioned about, subhanAllah, about many great shuyukh and ulama and awliyaullah of the past. People say that we didn't know about the Sadaqa of Zayn al-Abidin rahmatullahi alayhi until he passed away. When few people one day woke up and didn't find the sacks of food that they used to find in front of their houses every day, he said something is wrong today. Because for many, many years, every morning they would wake up and in front of their door was a sack of food, flour and whatnot. And that's how those people survived. There were more than 80 families like this who survived just because somebody was delivering food to them every night. And one morning when they wake up, open the door to look for that food, and it's not there, they know something is wrong. And that same morning it's announced that Zayn al-Abidin has passed away. That's when people made the connection. Especially when they saw marks on his body, like you would see on a laborer, somebody who's used to carrying loads all their life. They saw that his body is all scarred up, it's all calloused. So it's one thing to do a deed. It's another thing altogether to preserve that deed and protect it. If we take a good deed, the deed could be perfectly fine. But we take it and we throw it at people, we show it to them, it loses its value in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ اللَّهَ طَيِّبٌ لَا يَقْبَلُ إِلَّا الطَّيِّبِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is pure, and He only accepts that which is pure. So our responsibility and duty, whenever we are doing a good deed, first of all, correct our intention. The second thing is that because shaitan is with us, he doesn't just let us go. He doesn't let us off the hook that easily. He is constantly working on us. We need to constantly be checking our intention. That's why these people were so secretive about their deeds. And this is not something that just the people of the past used to do. One of my teachers told me many years ago that he was spending time with a sheikh. They were traveling somewhere, and he said, I could see, I was awake, I couldn't sleep, and the sheikh, he got up in the middle of the night, he saw that I was awake, so he pretended to go back to sleep. He covered his head with his sheet. And after 5-10 minutes later, he checked to see if I was still awake or not, and when he thought I was sleeping, then he got up and he prayed his tahajjud. And before I could get up, he went and lay down again. Why are they going to these extremes and these troubles? Because they want these deeds to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unaffected. The moment we show people our deeds, it's no longer for the sake of Allah. When I say show, it means do it for the sake of showing them or displaying. Or after we've done a deed sincerely, we start talking about it in such a way that our ikhlas goes away. Like, one of my teachers used to give the example of when they visited someone's house, and he said to his son that, son, bring Zamzam in those glasses that we brought on our 4th Hajj. So what's he doing? What has he done? He has taken a perfectly fine deed, such a noble deed, such as Hajj, and he is throwing it at people to gain appreciation for them, for himself. So when you take a deed that is to be done only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you start flashing it around, flaunting it so that you get appreciation from people, then Allah says, okay, fine. You want it from people? Go get it from people. There's nothing with me. You will not get anything from me. And that's why hadith tells us that a person who did any deed for the sake of anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the day of judgment, Allah will say, no, go to so and so and get your reward. What are you coming to me for? I don't have any reward for you. Because you did it to get something from someone else. So that puts us in a very precarious and a very dangerous position. And ikhlas and sincerity is something that a person can never be content about. Once a person starts claiming to be sincere, then they need to really be concerned about themselves. When we claim, when we are so, sometimes we boast about our sincerity. We're doing this for the sake of Allah. We're doing that for the sake of Allah. We've done that for the sake of Allah. We are boasting about our sincerity, so where is the sincerity? If it was truly sincere, not even our families would know about it. Like the hadith about the 7 people who will be placed under the shade of the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of those people is the man who gave Sadaqa so secretly that when he spent with his right hand, his left hand wouldn't know. But sometimes when we do a good deed, not only does the left hand know, the neighbor on the right side and the neighbor on the left side, and everyone knows that so-and-so did such and such deed. We have examples of people from the past who would fast for years and their own wives wouldn't know about it. They wouldn't know how. Because they do everything so secretly and privately that no one knows, no one needs to know. Leave the house early in the morning. Don't worry, I'll take care of my own breakfast. Come home after 11. She has no idea that for years this man has been fasting. He does labor, he does work, has his business out in the morning, back in the evening. But such a high level of devotion. So whether it's fasting, whether it's giving Sadaqa, whether it's tilawat of Quran, whether it's nafil salawat, whether it's dhikrullah, or whether it's doing the work of deen, these things should not become a token that we use to get something from people, to win the appreciation of people, or to try to get importance in the sight of others. These are not chips, they're not bargaining chips. These deeds are not things that are meant for people. They're very noble. And the greatness and the power of these deeds comes from the ikhlas. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ tells us that the help that descends on my ummah, it descends because of the weak ones amongst them, because of their du'as, and because of their ikhlas. They are weak, they know they will not get any recognition anyways. No one knows them, no one cares about them. So they're going and doing deeds with sincerity. No one to share with, no one to tell, and they're making dua. And with this sincerity, they're bringing down help not only upon themselves, but they're bringing down the help of Allah upon others as well. So anything that leads to an ostentatious attitude, the attitude of showing something, it is something disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to say, قُلْ مَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُتَكَلِّفِينَ. The Quran is saying that, O Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, tell them that I don't want any compensation for what I'm doing. I have devoted my life and all my energy and everything of mine to conveying the message of Allah to you. I don't want anything back from you. I don't want anything. And the second thing is, I am not the kind of person who does takalluf. And takalluf here means to claim to know something that you don't really know. To claim to know something that you don't know. To claim to have something that you don't have. To claim or to show you're doing something that you're not doing. Now, all of these traits are condemned in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, the attitude of knowing more than we actually know, acting like we know when we don't, it's a very dangerous thing. Because admitting that you don't know is half of knowledge. The ulama have written that la adri, saying that I don't know, acknowledging that you don't know, that's half of knowledge. Because once you acknowledge that you don't know, then the doors of knowledge are going to open. As long as you are in this mental state that I know, the next chapter of knowledge is just not going to open, because you put up a mental block. You already think that you know. And then it becomes a matter of pride. It becomes a matter of your own ego, that, well, I've told myself that I know, or I've told other people that I know, so why should I go and learn? Why should I go to so-and-so and ask? Why should I open up such and such book? Why should I listen to so-and-so? Or I already know. So just by making that false claim that I know, I have closed upon myself so many doors of knowledge. I've deprived myself. And worse, I've stayed in the state of ignorance that I was in. When we start saying that, no, I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know that, then the yearning to learn and the attitude of a learner comes into a person. Now you're ready to learn. When you admit that you don't know, that means you have taken the first step to learning. A child goes to school the first day telling himself that I don't know anything. And they're scared, they're nervous. How am I going to do this? I don't know anything. But because they're in the right state of mind, they start learning things very, very quickly. Well, I didn't know the alphabet. I'm learning the alphabet. I didn't know numbers. I've learned numbers. I didn't know how to add and subtract. I've learned how to add and subtract. But a child who goes with this mentality that I know it all, what are they going to learn from school? Nothing. And imagine if the assumption is false. They're telling themselves they know when they don't. What a disaster for that person. It's even worse when it's applied to deen. A person who doesn't know aqaid and they tell themselves that they know. A person who doesn't know the fara'id of deen or the necessary aspects of a certain worship, they tell themselves they know, or they show that they know. But they're going to spend the rest of their life performing this worship in either an incomplete way or an incorrect way and ruin their own akhirah. A person who doesn't know about zakat, a person who doesn't know. Our issue is that our nafs, it gets larger and larger and larger and eventually takes control of us. And eventually, it's that nafs that damages our sincerity. Because the nafs wants to be pleased. It wants to be praised. It wants to be pampered. It wants to have respect. It wants acknowledgement. It craves for acknowledgement. So sometimes a person will say things directly, sometimes they'll just pass subtle hints that I've done this, I know this, I've done this, so the other person gets the impression that, oh, okay, this is somebody I should appreciate. This is somebody very important, this is somebody who's done a lot. So whatever it is, whether we're dropping hints, whether we're saying things clearly and openly, it's all damaging our sincerity, and it's all damaging the acceptance of those deeds in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for us who have not gone through proper tarbiyah, who have not been trained or stayed in the company for a long time, the company of, of proper people, then our whole lives become just what we call showboating. Everything we do is just a display. And even the work of deen becomes just something to display. So we do it, we're happy that it's happening because we're going to get credit for it. And if something doesn't happen, we lose our credit, so we increase our efforts and keep doing things that will keep being attributed to us, and we'll keep getting credit for it. It'll make us look good. And to us, that will make us a more important person. This attitude, this premises is completely false. Because the moment we do that, we fall in the sight of Allah. And when we fall in the sight of Allah, we fall in the sight of people as well. It's when our actions get accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah will put importance for us, love for us, respect for us in the hearts of people, and that when it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nobody can take it away. So the formula of gaining respect is actually to rush to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to rush to people. When we rush to people, or we give away our deeds to people by showing them, by displaying them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has nothing to do with those actions anymore. So, well, it wasn't for me, so I don't want it. The people cannot benefit from those actions. Maybe one or two people will praise this person, but eventually there is nothing for this person but disgrace. So ikhlas, sincerity, is what builds a person, it's what elevates a person, it's what raises a person. And the more a person will try to make their a'mal and their deeds sincere and pure for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the higher Allah is going to elevate this person. And lack of ikhlas is something that the barakah, the blessings of that act are completely removed and vanished. When Imam Malik rahmatullahi was writing his book, the Muwatta, and this is looked at as the first major compilation of hadith. the first major organized compilation of hadith in sequence of fiqh chapters was the Muwatta. Now, it took Imam Malik rahmatullahi many years. Some say 18 years it took him to compile this book. Some say less. So while he's compiling it and taking his time, someone came to him and said, you know what, someone else has also compiled a Muwatta. And it's already been written. And it is out. It's available for people. So what's the point of now you continuing to work on it? We already have one. So Imam Malik rahmatullahi said something very interesting. He said, الَّذِي كَانَ لِلَّهِ بَقِيًا. The one that was written for the sake of Allah shall remain in the world. And the one that was written otherwise shall not remain. So I'm not worried about who else is doing it. I'm more worried that am I doing it for the right reasons? He took his time and completed his work. And his Muwatta is the only Muwatta we know. And that other one, it vanished. Its copies vanished. And there is no mention of it anywhere. And the Muwatta Imam Malik is taught in every institution worth being called an institution. Any university or madrasa that has any worth in it is teaching this book. No system of Islamic education at higher levels can be complete without the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So where did he get that acceptance from? And where did he get that widespread acknowledgement from? From the sincerity of the compiler. These 6 books of ahadith that we rely on, that we refer to as the greatest source of knowledge after the Quran, the Sahih. You have to look at the lives of the people who were behind it. And some time ago, we did a whole series on the lives of the compilers of these books, Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim and Imam Tirmizi, Imam Dawood and Imam Nasa'i and all the others, rahimahumullah. We spoke about them. These were not ordinary people. Not only were they extraordinary scholars, they were extraordinary awliyaullah. They were extraordinary in their taqwa, in their scrupulousness, and their piety. Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi is taking a bath and praying 2 rakats and making dua before writing every single hadith in this book. Without exception. Without missing out a single hadith. He is doing this before every single hadith. So a person who is turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with so much earnest, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give him the maqam that Sahih al-Bukhari has today. So, you and I need to reflect on the condition of our hearts. And everyone has some sincerity. There's no doubt that everyone has a degree of sincerity. But shaitan can always creep in and take advantage of the little bit of insincerity that could be present at any time. One of the Salaf was talking about crying. He said, crying out of fear of Allah, he said 9/10 of it is ostentation, 9/10 of it is showing off, and 1/10 of it is sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, if you can cry once a year with no one knowing about it, knowingly, no one hearing it, no one seeing it, no one learning about it, if you can do that once a year, he said it's a lot. So through our efforts of self-reform and self-correction, we can change the culture of showing and flashing everything to the culture that was present in the time of Sahaba and the time of Tabi'een. And this is from those aspects of deen that it's not very, very apparent. It's all inside. But it will reflect through our actions, it will reflect through our attitudes. And like I mentioned, today, many of the things we do, we just do it because it's a matter of prestige. Because it's expected of us. Or it will make us look better. And if we don't do it, it will make us look bad. So if that is the underlying cause and the motive for our actions, our good deeds, then there is nothing for them in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if there is nothing for them in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what impact do you think these good deeds will have on ourselves? Nothing. Because they weren't accepted. Somebody asked that why is it that when the people of the past spoke, their words had such a powerful impact on the hearts, and when we speak, we don't have that kind of impact. Why is it? So the answer was, there was a huge difference in the sincerity. These people were speaking only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we are speaking with so many things, we are so distracted when we're speaking. And we have so many motives running through our minds and our hearts when we're speaking. So how could we expect to have that same impact? Even though from amongst the Tabi'is, there were those who would not speak. They were so miserly and stingy with words. They did not want to, and people would sit in front of them for hours. They wouldn't say a word. Because they didn't need to. They didn't need to. You just sit with them. You sit in their company, your heart begins to change. You feel the piety. You feel their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You feel their desire for akhirah. You feel their dislike and distaste of this world. You feel it just by sitting with them. So we all have a long ways to go in terms of self-reform and self-correction. But we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere by taking practical steps. And the easiest thing to do, not necessarily always the easiest, but the simplest and the most practical thing to do, is to try to take an honest look inside and see where do the wrong intentions creep into my heart and when. And we try to stop them before they happen. And make ourselves understand that no matter who it is or what it is that I'm trying to gain, if it is something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is fani, it is temporary, it's going to end. And because I am chasing after something that's going to end, then the everlasting thawab of akhirah will not be given to me. Allah wants to give us, for every amal, Allah wants to give us something that's never ever going to end. If I do this today to win someone's praise, he praised me, it's over, it's finished. Somebody appreciated me, let's say. They did it, it's over, it's finished. When I reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will say, no, you wanted that reward, you got it, now get lost. Then it's finished. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to give us for every amal, for every dhikrullah, for every salat, for every siyam, for every good deed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to give us a never-ending reward. He says, مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَدُ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. Whatever people have is temporary, and what Allah has is everlasting. So, if we make ourselves understand that why do I want to take this precious action and just throw it away on some temporary worldly gain and have nothing to show for it on the day of judgment? Why should I do that? When even for the smallest action I can get an ajr that will never ever ever end. And thus, the attitude of sincerity starts coming in. And we become more careful about why we do things and how we do things. And the culture of showing off our good deeds, of talking about our good deeds, it changes into a culture of people that are concerned about preserving their good deeds and making them reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala safe and sound. And this is something we all have to work on. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our hearts sincere, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to do such acts that when we reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we find the complete ajr and complete thawab for all of those actions. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from those acts that when we reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there is no thawaab for us. May Allah give us tawfiq and understanding. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.